Is it time to record a video that is inevitably going to get at least one person in the comments yelling at me about how I have no idea what it is that I'm talking about? Oh boy, howdy it is! My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and welcome back to the channel. Hello everyone, if you enjoy what I do, including tier lists covering some of our favorite turn-based strategy RPGs like Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, then a like on this video and a subscription to the channel would be very much appreciated. Also, as always, thank you to all of the channel supporters. You'll see all of their names scrolling by on the right side of the screen at the end of the video. It would be much harder to do all of this channel stuff without the support that you guys provide, so thank you so much. If you're interested in directly supporting in that way, links to both the YouTube memberships and Patreon are in the description. Thank you very much. So, Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. Far less beloved than the original Final Fantasy Tactics, and even looked down on by a lot of people as being too kiddie, too cartoony, not having the same depth of political writing and intrigue that Final Fantasy Tactics has. And that last part is true. But while this isn't what we're here to talk about today, I think people really do undersell the maturity and the emotional impact of the story in Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. That's something that I'm planning to talk about sometime down the line. We will see how my schedule shakes out because Lord knows I've not been able to maintain a proper schedule recently. But what we're here to talk about today is all of the generic classes in Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, and there are a lot, so I want to keep moving through here pretty quick. Base ground rule, we have from S to F. A few people have suggested that I have some more tiers available in these tier lists, so we have a wide array this time around to provide a little bit more nuance. We'll be discussing each class based on what abilities it brings to the table, what its stats generally tend to be, and then because there's some overlap in terms of what races can use what classes in FFTA, I added them in. So like we have human white mage or Hume white mage versus Viera white mage versus Numu white mage. Because they can have different stats, and having any class that is the same on other races, but that you have other different classes or jobs that you can have as a secondary due to the different options between the races, means that sometimes a job will be better on one race versus another, right? So I figured it's worth discussing that. We won't go into it too in-depth, but where there's that overlap between different races, we will get into a little bit more of a discussion as to why it's good maybe, or better, or worse on one race versus another. So, we're going to go through in order here, starting with Hume Soldier, ending with Moogle Gadgeteer, and I'll be honest, it's been a long time since I played Final FFTA, right? Like, it's been a long time, far longer than Final Fantasy Tactics. So we're going to be operating a little bit more on vibes here. I do have a list of all the different classes and jobs over here on my other monitor, so I can reference it if there's anything in particular that I need to check out. But we're going to cruise right through here. So, starting right off, we have Hume Soldier, and this is a pretty decent middle-of-the-road option. It's definitely not as God get me out of here as Squire is in FFT. It's more akin to Knight. There's not really as much of a Squire option. Really, Soldier kind of combines the two if we want to think about it more in depth, but it's a very solid melee brawler. It's got a lot of HP, some of the highest in the game, very good defenses, very good attack, not top of the tier or anything, but very solid. It's a little slow, and it can be a little limited in its ability options. Really what you're doing with a soldier is like breaking stats. You're not really breaking gear like knights do, but then you also have other options where you can like do a little bit of first aid to get a very small amount of HP back, or even provoke enemies, which can be very beneficial given how tanky and how good of a frontline fighter soldier is. So it's never really a bad option to have. It's not going to have versatility in the same way that some other jobs will, but you can always take a secondary class to help complement that, right? So I don't think they're terrible at all. I think they're very solidly a middle-of-the-road C-tier job, and I'm never really opposed to having one. Next up, we have Thief, and Thief is definitely an interesting discussion. I kind of like Moogle Thieves more, which we'll talk about when we get there, but Thief is also pretty solid. It gets you counter, it allows you to start stealing different gear, it can be very dodgy, it can hit decently hard, not overly hard, it doesn't have particularly great damage, but when you consider the speed that it brings to the table and the overall kind of dodginess that you can get as a result, it's not terrible. It's not a very great combat class, but given the way that accuracy and targeting tends to work in FFTA, where you have like really low chances to hit from the front, better from the sides, great from the back. It could be good to have something that can help to influence that dodge rate a little bit more. So not really a frontline fighter. I'm going to say probably D tier. There's better options for pure combat, but especially early in the game, they can be all right. Next up, we have archers, and archers are definitely way better in FFTA than they are in FFT. I'll tell you that much for free. You've got, again, okay damage, kind of similar to Thief, okay HP. You have some decent speeds, some actually pretty good magic resist, which is interesting. But what you really get with Archer is your first instance of raw ranged physical damage, which can be pretty decent, with the ability to also impact different statuses. Kind of think of like Mustadio's aimed shot in FFT, but applied to Archer instead. So you can cripple things, you can disable weapon arms, you can blind, you can do different statuses like that. And it makes it a more universally useful class early on. There's definitely better options later, so I don't think we're going to get much higher than C. But as far as a starting physical class is concerned, it definitely is a good way to get some range damage going. And I'm overall happy with the utility that it brings to the table from the beginning to the end of the game. Now, White Mage. White Mage is awesome. Mages in FFT are kind of busted in general, honestly, especially once you get certain builds online. But White Mage is really nice. The AoE healing, the protect, all that type of good stuff. Like, it's exactly what you would expect from a White Mage, and the stats reflect that as well. It doesn't have good HP, it's got good MP, doesn't have good attack, but it's got good magic and even better resistance, so you do have good options there. Your speed is not great, unfortunately, so if you're relying on it as a support class, you're going to have to pick when and where you do stuff, but, I mean, it's not terrible. Cure, Cura, Curaga, ability to revive, give auto life. It's pretty versatile, and I'm never really unhappy to have one of these. I'm going to put it solidly in B tier. Now, Black Mage. Black Mage is definitely an interesting discussion. Very similar to White Mage in terms of its stat spread. Again, not good HP, good MP, no physical attack. Like, why would you need it? Add physical defense. But very solid magic for attacking. Very, very solid resistance. Like, almost top class resistance in terms of enemy magic. And they're, you know, again, kind of slow. But this is where you really start to get a lot of good damage output, because you have, of course, the full range of magic attacks. Fire, Viera, Faraga, Thunder, Thundara, Thundaga. You have the basics here. There are other classes that get into the more advanced stuff, but it's nice because you can get, like, Geomancy to make enemies less resistant to your spells, so you deal a lot of damage. You can get a ranged combo ability, which is kind of useful in FFT, but still it's there. And you can get the ability to counterattack with magic if you get magic cast on you. And considering how tanky you are when it comes to magic resistance, that's not nothing. So I really like Black Mages. I don't think that they're absolutely top tier like in FFT, because they are still a more basic job. But again, I mean, they're going to dish out the hurt, and make no mistake. Now, Fighter. Oh yeah, Fighter. This is possibly my favorite generic job in FFT. Fighters are just awesome, man. Like, if you want to have an overall versatile damage dealer, you can't go wrong with a Fighter. Yeah, there's other stuff like Ninja that might hit a little bit harder, but, like, Fighter's got some stuff that's bringing to the table. The key things to keep in mind here are that you have good HP and defense and absolutely stellar attack. So you're going to be able to dish out damage like nobody's business just based off of your stats alone. Then when you start to look at what, like, some of the other options are that you have for damage, it's nuts. Think of, like, combining Monk from FFT with, like, a more damaging overall class. Like, you've got Rush to knock enemies back and deal damage. You get Wild Swing, which hits all around you. Beatdown for low hit rate but big damage. Blitz for a guaranteed chance to hit, which is massively valuable in FFTA. Air Render, one of the most important abilities in the game, is it gives your melee fighters an actual range damage attack that can do very solid damage. Far Fist, that can do AoE range damage. Air Blast, that can do a different type of AoE range damage. Backdraft, take a little bit of a hit to be able to deal even more damage and fire damage at that, so you can synergize with stuff. It's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. Combine that with really good counter abilities like Bone Crusher and Strike Back, which are some of the strongest counter abilities in FFT. You can two-hand your weapons with double hand to get increased damage. Like, it's just nuts. There's no getting around it. Fighter is an S-tier class. As soon as you can make a character into a fighter, like if you can make Marsh into a fighter early on and get some of the good swords that give him good abilities, you're set for the rest of the game, easily. Now, Paladin is my next option. It's one of my second favorite classes in the game. It's not going to be as good as Fighter, but it's definitely very strong. I think we're going to put it in A tier. What's nice about Paladin is it has a very wide array of good defensive stats. good HP, fairly solid attack, not as good as fighter, but definitely serviceable. Great defense, very good resistance. The big thing is that it's slow and it's not doing really great with magic damage, but I mean, magic damage really shouldn't be your concern on Paladin anyway. The thing that's nice about Paladin is its good blend of offensive and defensive capabilities. Like, just being able to restore HP, or boost your magic defense and resistance to tank, or be able to cover for allies, do different things like that, but then have big damaging holy abilities like Saint Cross and Holy Blade to really drop the nukes when and where it's time for you to do so. That's awesome. It's really nice. Combine that with reflex to avoid regular attacks, getting weapon defense up to make yourself even tankier. Like, if fighter is the human's main damage option in melee, Paladin is your main defense option while still also being really good at damage. Like, it's an awesome class. The big thing that holds it back is it can be really hard to find the weapons that actually teach you some of the skills that you need, like Holy Cross and Holy Blade, or Saint Cross and Holy Blade, I should say. So that can hold it back a little bit, but even then, it's a great defensive option. Now, Ninja, the other big human melee damage dealer. Ninjas are pretty nasty, as you would expect. Not quite as overpowered as they are in FFT, I would say. They're definitely frail. They've got bad HP. They've got bad defense, bad magic resist, but they are very fast, and they've got very serviceable attack. Combine that with the fact that, just like with ninjas in FFT, they can learn to dual wield, even though they need to actually learn it. They don't have it innately, and you have a very strong damage option. Now, the issue with ninjas that I have is your actual ninja skill is pretty terrible. All of the veil attacks do pretty garbage damage due to the fact that ninjas have really low magic. And while, yeah, it's nice to be able to potentially put a status effect on something, the fact that you're doing like 1 to 4 damage and maybe putting a status effect on really isn't worth it when you can just run up to someone and slap them with 2 katanas for a massive amount of damage, right? So 9 times out of 10, what you're doing with your ninjas is you're running up, maybe you throw an item to deal some ranged damage on your way to a squishy target, and then you're just blowing it up with long move range and good speed. So that's really all you're ever doing with ninjas. They're pretty simple, but they are really nice. And then, of course, being able to get double hand and like put it on your fighter, or like dual wield, I should say, and put it on your fighter or your paladin. Oh, be still my heart. It's so strong. It's so strong. So due to the fact that ninja skill is pretty mid, I'm going to put ninjas in A tier rather than S tier. But, I mean, they do get really, really good options with dual wield. So that alone carries them pretty hard. Now, Hunter. Hunter's an interesting one. I do like Hunter. I've seen a lot of people say that they're not a huge fan of it, which I think is interesting, because I do think it gives you some pretty good options. This is just your direct carry-on from Archer, right? This is the advanced Archer class. And what's nice about Hunter is that it's going to give you some more AoE options and the ability to deal with scary monsters, while also just letting you use your normal ranged bow and arrow stuff. You've got decent stats overall. You're not particularly tanky, but you're a ranged damage dealer, so you shouldn't be. You've got very solid attack. You've got very solid speed. It's a nice option to level in, and you're going to be pretty strong using it as well. Now, the important things to keep in mind with Hunter are a couple of different abilities here. First off, you have your Sonic Boom, so you can do AoE damage, which is like the #1 thing that people go to Hunter for. AoE damage at ranged, on command, for no charge time, no MP, no nothing. That's real nice. You're going to be able to hit a lot of enemies much more reliably if you can hit a bunch of them at once. You're also able to give some boosts like crit rate and things like that. But really, what you care the most about, you want to be able to get your Ultima shot. Always good to have a class that's going to get an Ultima ability. And you're going to want to be able to get Sidewinder to deal a ton of damage to monsters, because monsters can get really nasty. Because of those utility abilities alone, I think Hunter very comfortably rests in A tier. There's going to be so many monsters that you have to fight. There's going to be so many opportunities to deal AoE damage with Sonic Boom. And the fact that you're going to be able to just grind better, even though it's no JP boost, let me tell you. But like, hunting is still nice in that regard. So a very, very solid ranged damage class. I'm never opposed to having them. I might wind up bumping it down to B tier. We'll see. It kind of floats between B and A for me, but right now it feels pretty good in A tier. Now, Blue Mage. Blue Mage is an interesting one. It's got just interesting stuff going on. It's got very middle-of-the-road stats, good magic resist, but like woohoo, decent magic itself, pretty mid-speed, unfortunately, and you're wholly reliant on learning abilities from monsters, which is not the easiest thing to do. Now, the abilities that you can get from Blue Magic can be very, very strong, and there's a bunch of busted stuff that you can do with it, as tends to be the case with Blue Magic in pretty much any Final Fantasy game. Like, I think just in terms of raw potential, Blue Mage really needs to go in like A or maybe even S tier, but it's kind of like an arithmetician in FFT, right? Can you make it absolutely busted by the end of the game? Sure. Will you just have done everything there is to do in the game by the time you get that online? Pretty much, unless you're just doing focused grinding constantly. So for that alone, I think I have to bring it down to B tier. It is potentially quite strong. You can do some really nasty stuff with it and kit out a character with blue magic and another job to like really make some nasty combos, but it just takes so long to get online, and you have to do so much with just dealing with certain monsters instead of just learning stuff from your weapons like every other job, that I really don't think I can justify putting it any higher than that, even though it is very good. Now, illusionist. Illusionist is our last Hume job here, and it's definitely an interesting one. So, illusionist is infamous in FFTA 2 for having a lot of really potential busted stuff going on with the synergy between different abilities that you can get. It's not as good in FFTA, even though it is still quite nice, but I don't think it's going to be absolute top tier. So how illusionist works is it deals damage to every enemy on the board, no matter where they are. It's got a high MP cost, but it can deal pretty much every element of damage and deal it to everything. So if you're fighting a group of enemies that have a particularly shared weakness to a different type of element, then you can really take advantage of that and deal a lot of damage. Is it going to be the strongest thing you can do? Potentially. It's also Hume Illusionist, which is not as good as Numu Illusionist, which we will talk about. I think it's overall a fine class. It's a decent damage dealer. If you can build a team that really makes the most of it, you can make good use of it to whittle down enemies before they even get to you. So I think it's going to fall in B tier, but it's not as good. Hume Illusionist, just not quite as strong. Even though, you know, you can get very strong abilities like half MP to make it easier to cast your spells, or being able to absorb MP when you get stuff cast on you. Like, that is nice, but it's a class that needs a lot of support, and there's other races that use it better. Now, that's the Hume classes done. Now we have to move on to my personal favorites, the Bangaa. And don't call them lizards. They will absolutely take offense to that. Now, Bangaa have a nice array of options here. They're all largely melee focused and physical damage focused, except for one interesting job. And we're starting off with the warrior. So, warrior is essentially just Hume fighter, but on Bangaa, but with a couple of different abilities thrown in there for fun. I love this job. It is slow, don't get me wrong, but it's got like the best HP in the game. It's got very solid attack, very solid defense. It is a physical powerhouse. Combine that with the fact that you can do your first aids, you can do your rends, but you then also have really powerful abilities like body slam that let you deal a lot of damage. That's really nice. Greased bolt, making it so enemies don't get reaction abilities against you. Very nice. Like, there's some nice stuff going on here. Monkey grip, being able to wield a two-handed weapon with one hand so you can still hold a shield. Like, be still my heart. That is such a strong option for any sort of defensive unit. Like, it's nice. It's really, really nice. So, I think if soldier's in C tier, I think warrior goes in B tier. Warrior has the ability to be strong all the way through to the end game, if simple. And I think it just has a little bit more utility in terms of the abilities that it brings to the table than Soldier does. Soldier doesn't really do damage while being a tanky class. Warrior does, which is really nice. Next up, we have White Monk. And White Monk, I think, is going to be another S tier class alongside Fighter. White Monk is just so gross. It's decently fast. It's got good attack. It's got, surprisingly, actually good magic. And it's got okay HP. But what's really nice about it is the abilities that it brings to the table. So much like Fighter, White Monk is going to bring some ranged physical damage to an overall race that really desperately needs it. This is Air Render, once again, allowing you to deal damage at range, equivalent to the damage you'd be dealing in melee, basically, while also having other options like Earth Render to deal a bunch of damage in a straight line, or Farfist to deal AoE damage. You basically have Monk from FFT combined with the fighter abilities that you have in FFTA. That's White Monk. It's really, really nasty. Like, you've got Chakra for healing. You've got Revive for resurrections. You've got Exorcism so you can get rid of undead monsters. Holy Sign to neutralize status enhancements. Like, it's just such a good class from an ability standpoint while having good stats on its own and decent like equipment options that I love White Monk. I think it's just one of the best classes in the game, for sure. Now, what is not one of the best classes in the game is Bishop, unfortunately, even though I really like it. This is the one magical option that Bangaa have, and I don't think it's necessarily D tier, because you can still do stuff with it, but Bangaa are not exactly known for their magic, right? I think this is a C tier class. Now, what makes Bishop potentially good is the fact that it adds magic to the Bangaa race. So if you're doing a mono race challenge, like I've done just in my own time in the past, it adds some much needed magic damage. And it has decent magic on its own as well. The problem is that there's not really a lot of synergy with any other job that Bangaa can use because, like, they don't really want magic. Like, you can have a white monk that can use Bishop skills, sure, but like, why would you want to? Once you kind of go into Bishop, you're at a little bit of a dead end. Like, you've decided that is what your Bangaa is doing. The other thing that's a little frustrating is the fact that you kind of just have middle-of-the-road damage options, and healing options as well. Like, yeah, you get Cura, you get, like, Holy to deal good, admittedly, damage. You get Water to deal kind of, like Viera, Thundara damage to enemies. Like, there's some options there. Same thing with Arrow, and it gives you versatility in terms of the damage types you can use, but you're never going to be putting out as much raw damage as, like, a Black Mage or a Sage, so the class tends to fall off. It's basically the Bangaa's version of a red mage, but then they're also not really good in terms of melee, so it's like, they're just in an awkward spot. They add versatility, they've got a few support options that are decent, they have like the return magic skill to counterattack like black mages do, they have half MP, which is fine. There's a couple of abilities on other Bangaa classes that could potentially make use of that, but like, it's just really the weakest option in terms of what Bangaa can bring to the table, and it's really a shame, because it is a cool job. Now, what is not a middle-of-the-road option is Defender. Oh boy, I love me some Defenders. So this is going to be a B-tier class. Like a lot of Bangaa classes, it's very strong in melee. It's pretty tanky. It's got good attack, good defense. It's fairly slow. But what Defender does is become incredibly durable while suddenly being able to dish out massive amounts of damage. Like, basically think of Warrior, but with more unique styles of abilities. The big thing that Defender has going for it is the manipulation of HP and statuses. Like, you have defense to boost your actual defenses. You have the ability to hibernate to remove status ailments. You can do some AoE damage around you with Tremor and Mow Down. You have the ability to get auto life and auto regen using Aura, and then you can blow yourself up using Meltdown to deal area damage equal to the amount of HP that you had. So you have this job that wants to get into the middle of the enemy force, take a bunch of hits, give itself a revive, blow itself up to deal a bunch of damage, and then get back up and keep going again. It's a really weird little class, but thanks to the fact that it uses two-handed weapons, it's got heavy armor, it can berserk if you need to, it can boost its own defense. Much like Paladin, it's very good at getting stuck in with the enemy. It just doesn't have quite as many damage options as something like Paladin does, so it's not quite as high ranked in my opinion, but it can definitely still do a lot of good work. Now we have Dragoons, one of my other favorite classes in the game, and I think Dragoons are very solidly A tier. Dragoons are our first spear-using units, and they have some nice ranged damage options as a result because they can hit at 2-point range, while also having a lot of different breath attacks that are going to deal good damage and allow you to take advantage of elemental weaknesses. You also get the fact that you can like jump and to deal big single target damage, and use Lancet to restore their own HP if they're going to be a more solid melee fighter. You can persuade dragons to leave if you want, and then you can also just deal non-elemental damage in a cone. You can get all these different abilities going on, while also having the option to do like res yourself using Dragonheart or get a combo. Like, they are a very versatile all-around good fighter, and while they might not be as, say, tanky as a defender or have as much raw damage output as some other classes, they've got good options all around, like very good HP, very good damage, solid defense. They're one of the second fastest Bangaa classes, so that's something as well, because Bangaa tend to be pretty slow. Like, it's definitely a very, very solid melee class, and I think because it's got such a wide variety of ranged damage abilities, it puts it pretty high in the tier, especially with AoE, because like things can be so dodgy in FFT. The more options you have to hit multiple enemies at once, the better off you're going to be. Now, next up, we have Gladiator, and I think Gladiator is going to go right up alongside Fighter and White Mage in S tier. The thing that's nice about Gladiator is it is one of your biggest single-target damage dealers when it comes to Bangaa, and they have versatility of damage types as well. Gladiators got very good HP, very good attack, solid defense. They're decently fast, third fastest Bangaa class in the game, and they have a lot of nice options in terms of what types of damage they can deal as well. Like fighters, they have things like Rush and Wild Swing and Beatdown, so you can deal big single target damage at a low accuracy rate, AoE damage in melee, knock enemies back. They can get 100% accuracy using Blitz. But then you also have the sword attacks, allowing you to deal fire, lightning, or ice damage to take advantage of elemental weaknesses. You also get strike back, so good counters in melee. You can double hand, again, like fighter, to deal bonus damage with your attacks. They're basically just Bangaa fighters. The only thing that they don't have available to them is things like air render to get ranged options. But you also get that off of White Monk. You don't need to worry about going into an advanced class to get that, unlike Humes with fighter. So really not a weakness for this job compared to where fighters are at. So I think it's okay that they're also in S tier. Finally, as far as Bangaa classes are concerned, we have Templar, which is just a really cool job. I really like it. It's got some interesting options. It's not the most statistically powerful Bangaa job. It's pretty slow. It's got great defense, though. Solid HP, solid damage, solid magic power. But the big thing that's going to make Templars really nice is their different abilities, like give an ally status affliction protection, reduce the speed of nearby enemies, actually deal MP damage, which can be pretty good if you're dealing with a bunch of mages, silence things, deal damage to MP by stealing souls, increase speed with haste, which is an insanely strong option and the only way that Bangaa have to cast a haste spell. And then Life Break, where if you've taken a bunch of hits, you can deal damage to the enemy equal to the amount of damage that you had taken. There's a lot of really nice options here, and that's before we even get into reaction support abilities. As far as reactions are concerned, Bone Crusher, huge big damage counterattack in melee when you take a hit. Weapon attack up, that's going to make literally every job that Bangaa have other than Bishops stronger by its very nature. You get a combo with it. It's a great job. I think the fact that it doesn't have great ranged damage skills makes it not quite S tier, but Templars can be really, really nasty, and they're really nice at being able to deal with enemy mages, which can make for a very good spot on a Bangaa heavy team. All right, we're getting close to halfway done here, and we're moving on to the Numu classes, or the Numo. I'm sure there's going to be someone that criticizes me for the way that I say that, but I've been saying Numu my entire life, and that's exactly what I'm going to keep saying. So Numu, much as Bangaa are your like heavy melee type characters, Numu are your heavy magic type characters. And as such, they're generally going to be the stronger option when it comes to casters than most other races in the game. Not all of them, we'll talk about that. But where Numu have any sort of overlap in terms of jobs with other races, they're generally going to be better at it. First off, we have the Beastmaster. Beastmaster is definitely an interesting job. It actually has decent physical attack, one of the only two Numu classes. I guess technically 3. Well, potentially 4, but we'll talk about Morpher. That's an odd one. It's a decently physically damage-oriented class, while having some weird options in terms of abilities. As the name would imply, what you're doing with a Beastmaster is you're going out onto the field of battle, and you're using them to control monsters. And then you can have those monsters fight for you. Goblins, flans, bombs, dragons, lamia, bugs, all of it. And that does give you some decent options. It's kind of like a less permanent version of a blue mage. You're not learning the skills of the monsters, you're just taming the monster temporarily to do what you want and use its skills and its stats for you. And this can be a good force multiplier because it's like, yeah, just pull an enemy off of the enemy line and make them my friends so that they take hits and deal damage for me. Like, that's awesome. That's just tipping the scales in your favor. But you're also very limited to whatever it is that the enemy happens to be fielding against you at any given time. And you don't have any other good options. You can give yourself haste if you get severely wounded. Woohoo. You can give yourself immunity to status ailments. Woohoo. Like, you can get all these abilities that are very contingent upon what the enemy is going to do to you, while also having active skills that are very contingent on what enemies are even on the battlefield. Like, it can do decent damage if you can get all of the skills and then adapt to what enemies are on the battlefield. Great. But if you're dealing with any sort of humanoid type targets, you're just out of luck. There's just nothing that you can do. So, yeah, it's not the best as far as damage or support options for Numu are, but when they are useful, they're not bad. So I think they're going to go in D. Thieves are more useful. They're going in E tier. What am I talking about? Beastmasters kind of suck. Okay, now what doesn't suck, however, is Black Mage for Numu. This is where we're looking at the damage. Got good MP, great magic damage, phenomenal magic resist, better than human dark mages or black mages. They're a little slow, but if you want raw magic damage in a very concise and compact package, Black Mage with Numu is where you want to be. As far as I'm aware, it gets exactly the same abilities as Black Mages in other races. It's just the raw stat difference, and then how you can combine Black Mage with other jobs unique to Numu that can make it really nasty. Like, a Black Mage with some alchemist or some sage skills can be really disgusting. Or those classes with Black Mage skills are going to be really, really disgusting. And I think because of the increased stats and that increased versatility, Numu Black Mage is absolutely going to go in S tier. It's a very common pick very early in the game. People love their Numu Black Mages, and they just continue to kick ass the entire time. Same thing for white mages. I think it's just going to move up one tier just because of the versatility of magic that they have, the versatility of different skills, the better stats overall for using magic. If a Hume white mage is going to be B tier, a Numu white mage is going to be A tier. They get, again, all the same abilities with better synergy with other job abilities, and they're just very strong. Now, where we can discuss some more interesting stuff is with Alchemist. Alchemist has phenomenal MP, very strong magic. They're still slow, pretty much all Numu classes are, except for Morpher, but they're great in terms of magic resistance, and they've got some really interesting, unique abilities. Alchemists are fun because they deal with a lot of status effects, like you get things like Astra to give one-time status effect prevention. You can deal damage to MP, you can poison enemies, you can turn them into toads, but then you can also use some of the highest damage magical abilities in the game. Meteor, huge AoE damage. Flare, the single strongest spell that black mages could cast in FFT, while alchemists are the only ones who get it here, baby, and it is nasty. Or just cast death. Just insta-kill something. Combine that with the fact that they get magic power up, they get maintenance so their stuff can't be stolen or destroyed. Like, there's a lot that alchemists can do, and they're one of the better ranged damage options in terms of magic that Numu can bring to the table. At the very least, it's not uncommon to pick up the alchemy skill and put it on another job to really make for an insanely versatile magic user that can just punch through pretty much anything. So I think Alchemist absolutely belongs in S tier just because of some of the insanely powerful spells that they can get and that magic attack up. Now, Numu Illusionist, again, is pretty much just a step above Hume Illusionist. Just the fact that you can get like magic power up from Alchemist, you can get other powerful Numu abilities. Again, it has better stats than Illusionist on Hume. Like, they're just really, really good. Like, having A+ magic, B+ magic resist, A+ MP, they're just awesome, man. Like, I love Numu Illusionist. They can deal a ton of damage, even though their spells are generally low impact overall. The amount of damage that you're able to accumulatively deal to the entire enemy force cannot be overstated. It is just so strong. Now, here's where we get to a couple of interesting ones. Morpher. Morpher kind of goes hand in hand with Beastmaster in terms of Numu being the ones that interact with beast enemies. And it's like the Numu version of Blue Mage. Morpher will literally transform into monsters that you've captured. This means that if you haven't captured enough monsters or any monsters, they do basically nothing. Like, all they can do is turn into a monster that you have in the monster bank and then use those monsters' abilities. Not only that, but you need to make the monster stronger by feeding it cure-alls, which are not the most common item around and also really useful as a way to just get any status effect off of your dudes. Not great. Now, what's nice is you get access to the abilities of all of the different variations of a form of monster. So if you turn into like a dragon or a goblin, you can get all of the abilities of those goblins or those dragons so long as you've got them captured in the monster bank. There's some versatility to be had there. Kind of, maybe, possibly better. At least in terms of versatility. than a beastmaster controlling an enemy and turning it to your side. But it's also so limited, and you have to go through so much work to be able to get monsters in the bank, to actually be able to use them. Like, at least a beastmaster can walk out onto the field of battle and possess an enemy monster, essentially, or mind control it, and have it fight alongside you. Morpher doesn't even get to do that. So I think it goes in F. Like, you can get damage to MP, which is nice. Like, get some damage mitigation by burning your MP, but you're playing New Moo. You need all the MP that you can get. You don't want to burn it. Just don't get hit. It's an interesting class. I like that they experimented, but Morpher ain't it, man. Morpher ain't it. Now, what is it is Sage, though. Sage is like the pinnacle of New Moo classes. Good HP, phenomenal MP, good attack, good defense, great magic. Kind of lame magic resist, actually, and pretty bad speed. But, the physical capabilities of Sage really shouldn't be underestimated. Like, they wield maces and shields, and they go in and they bash heads. They're decently tanky. They can actually wield decent gear, and then also have some really nasty spells alongside of it. So sages get a lot of these sort of same versatility options, the gap filler options that bishops do in Bangaa. So like your water, arrow, different things like that. They can drain to get their own HP back up while dealing damage to enemies. They can blind things. They can raise, which is nice. Don't have to take white magic for that. But Giga Flare, Bio, Ultima Blow, the Ultima weapon ability. Dude. Dude. Combine that with the fact that they get reflex, so they can just dodge physical attacks against them. They can get weapon defense up to make themselves tankier. They can get shield bearer, so that other New Moo classes can wield shields. Like, Sage is great as a decent frontline option for New Moo, and their skills are absolutely disgusting, so they're definitely going in S tier. Now, finally, Time Mage. Time Mage is definitely an interesting one. Time Mages are always kind of odd in Final Fantasy Tactics games, but what makes New Moo Time Mages really nice is the fact that they have some of the best, if not the best, magic growth in the game. So leveling as a Time Mage is going to make all of your damage options way better, on top of the fact that you can just, you know, like, cast haste, or stop, or slow, all of which are extremely powerful. Anything that's going to manipulate the turn order in any way in your favor, massively good. Haste, like, increases speed, period. Quicken allows something to move instantly, which can be a massive force multiplier. Slow to reduce enemy turns. Reflect to reflect magic. Stop to negate enemy turns. Silence to keep spells from being cast. And then, of course, quarter and demi to be able to cut enemy HP by a quarter or a half. It's really nice, dude. Like, you've got decent percent damage there with the demi spells. You've got the ability to make yourself faster, the enemy slower. It's definitely good stuff. However, Time Mage is also very dependent on what types of other characters and jobs you have that it can boost. And it caught a direct nerf from FFT, where haste is no longer an AoE ability, so you have to single target stuff. And so I think that brings it down a little bit. I think Time Mage in this iteration, both for New Moo and for Moogles, which we'll get to, because really functionally the class's stats don't matter too much outside of growths, I think it's a B tier class. I put a little bit more weight on the shoulders of Time Mages in the past when I was a kid playing these games than I think I really do now, because, like, yeah, you can hasten things a lot. You can manipulate the turn order of the battlefield, quicken and slow and stop, but you can also just be dealing more direct damage with other jobs as well. So you need a little bit more of a focused setup, I would say, to make the most of what Time Mage can do. And that does make it very strong, don't get me wrong, but I don't think it's as universally applicable as a lot of these other jobs have been. Now we're moving on to the Viera, the sexy bunny girls themselves, who have just taken over the internet, especially if you look at Final Fantasy XIV. Oh, Lord. Bunny boys and bunny girls have definitely supplanted things like the Aura, for example, for most looted characters in Final Fantasy. And they have some really, really fun options, really strong capabilities in FFTA, which I very much appreciate. Viera probably rival Hume's as being some of the most versatile characters in the game, with a very strong array of physical and magical damage options, also getting some support options, while also having a lot of unique jobs that really make them quite capable. So first off, we have the Fencer, and I think the Fencer, I like Fencer more in FFTA 2, which we will talk about at some point down the line, I'm sure, where it has, I feel like, a little bit more physical capability. But if you're looking at like raw physical damage options, Fencer is pretty high up there for Viera. They've got good HP, very good attack, solid defense, actually very good defense, better than I thought. And they're decently fast, although pretty much all Viera classes are really fast. They're definitely one of the fastest races in the game. And it just gives you a lot of simple damage options, like you get ranged physical damage options, you can poison things, you can get like 100% accuracy on things. Really, the fact that they can poison so early on is really nice in terms of overall damage output, while also being able to deal AoE damage to get pretty much 100% chance to hit. There's definitely options here. They also get reflex very early. If you're able to get a Mirage Vest, they can bear shields. Like, it's a very solid all-rounder class. And while it's generally not something that you're going to be keeping your Viera in, and they're typically not going to be fighting in melee very often except for on Fencer, it does give them an option for that, which I do very much appreciate. Overall, I think it's probably a C tier class. It's generally not something you're going to use into the end game, but when you do use it, and if you really choose to have a Viera lean into it, it can be really, really nice. It's just not as strong as other options. White Mage for Viera is pretty much identical, I would say, to Hume White Mage. It does have the ability to synergize a little bit with some of the other unique magic options that Viera have. Things like double cast with Red Mage, being able to be on a summoner to do some more direct healing, things like that. But I don't think those options elevate it particularly highly above Hume White Mage. Like, White Mages are pretty typecast. They're going to heal, they're going to raise, they're going to cast some protection and shell spells, and that's it. The main thing that is nice is having Red Mage double cast to be able to double up and have protect and shell go out simultaneously, but I don't think that as a feature is really enough to elevate White Mage on Viera, particularly above Hume White Mages. Archers for Viera are definitely going to be a bit stronger, I would say, than Hume Archers. Their stats are just a little bit nicer. They've got very decent attack, very decent HP. They're quite fast. They have all the same abilities otherwise, but they also build into the Viera Sniper that we'll talk about in a minute. That is definitely better than Hunter, and having the combination of Sniper and Viera Archer abilities makes for a very versatile, damaging, supporting, enemy debuffing ranged character down the line. So I do like Archer a little bit more on Viera. I think it is the stronger choice for that race. Now next we have Assassin, and Assassin is kind of nuts, man. I can't lie. So if you're familiar with Celia and Lete, or Setia and Lete, I can't really remember, in FFT, the assassins that you wind up fighting a number of times, especially later on in the game, with their ability to just insta-kill someone or have like a bunch of ranged damage and status effect options while also being able to fight in melee, that's basically what Assassin is here. It's not as busted since it's not a boss-type enemy, but you can stop things with Shadowbind. You can insta-kill things with Last Breath. You can silence targets, put things to sleep, potentially doom them, cause chills to slow the target, seal things in stone. You can petrify, addle targets. Like, it's pretty nasty. And what makes this class cool is it can handle both katanas and bows. So you can use this as a ranged damage option or more of a get stuck in damage dealer that's also going to be dishing out a bunch of status effects. And that level of versatility is really, really nice. Now, notably, it doesn't really have any great reaction or support abilities. It just gets return fire, so it can like grab and throw an arrow back or something if something attacks it from range. But that's pretty niche overall. But the overall suite of abilities that it has is great. Combine that with the really nice stats that it has, with admittedly bad HP, but solid attack, very good magic, and the best speed in the game, meaning you get a lot more actions to utilize. Assassin is very easily an S tier class up alongside Sage. You are never unhappy to have an assassin. It is one of the jobs that people rush the fastest whenever possible with Viera. It is by far one of their best jobs, and a terror on the battlefield, whether you're using it or it's being used against you. Next up, we have Sniper, the ultimate in ranged arrow damage. We are looking at a job with phenomenal attack, very good speed, and not a whole lot else, but that's fine, because it doesn't need a whole lot else. Snipers basically just archers on steroids with a lot of similar abilities that synergize well with the overall archer abilities, both some options to get some really nice damage out there. Double shot just allows you to double up on your damage for free, literally all the time. It's stupidly strong. Beso Toxico allows you to poison enemies while also dealing a lot of damage. Death Sickle can just, like, afflict doom to kill something in a couple of turns. They can turn invisible. They can deal HP and MP damage equal to the amount of HP they've lost, which is gross. They can aim and break armor and weapons. Like, there's just a weird amount of stuff that Sniper can do. I think it makes it a very clear S tier choice as well. Snipers are just gross. It's not uncommon to see people field multiple snipers just for the double shot damage, because, like, why do you need anything fancy when you can just essentially Gatling gun arrow down any enemy on the board and just blow things up without any issue while standing way far away at range and being really fast? Like, there's a reason that this class caught some nerfs in FFTA 2. They were insanely strong. They're still insanely strong there, but here, oh my god, they are just so good. Viera are just so good. Speaking of so good, welcome to the most broken class in the game, Red Mage. Why is Red Mage the most broken class in the game? Well, their stats are just kind of fine, right? Middling HP, middling MP, fine attack, middling defense, fine magic, middling resistance, middling speed. But they are the jack-of-all-trades class, as they have always been ever since Final Fantasy I. They can use a wide range of black magic, a wide range of white magic. They can fight in melee. They can wear decently heavy armor without issue. But the biggest thing is the support ability. Double cast. Double cast is stupid. Like, yeah, okay. The spells that you're casting, Fire, Thunder, Blizzard, not particularly damaging on their own. Cure, yeah, same thing. Sleep and Poison, you can put some status effects on things. You have Barrier to get some extra defense. All fine options. But what if you can do 2 spells in one turn? Suddenly now you're doubling up on your AoE damage, or doubling up on your healing, or doubling up on your defense boosts, or doubling up on putting things to sleep, or poisoning them. What if you combine that with other spells? Things like Summoner, Elementalist, jobs that we're going to be talking about here shortly. Hell, even just White Mage. Double Curaga. Heal your entire party to full. Why not, right? Double cast is disgusting. It takes a massive amount of AP to learn, and for good reason. But because of that one skill, Red Mage is potentially the best job in the game. You can just blow things out of the water by doubling up on the spells that you cast. It takes a lot of MP, sure, but that's what things like Ethers are for, man. Turn economy is king, and saying I'm going to take 2 actions in one turn with magic, which is pretty much the strongest thing in the game. Turns out that's pretty strong. Also, did I mention that Red Mage is the job that gets Magic Power Plus? Make those doubled up spells even stronger? Yeah. Plus they can fight in melee, plus they're decently tanky. Like, Red Mages are just stupid, man. They caught a nerf in FFTA 2 because obviously they had to, and they're still disgustingly powerful. I love Red Mages. You love Red Mages. We all love Red Mages. Now, those are not the only powerful casters that Viera have available to them. Next up, we have the Summoner. Again, famously one of the stronger classes from FFT. Summoner is pretty much just as good here, I would say, with the added effect that they don't have to worry about cast times for those big summons. They just have to worry about MP, which is way easier to handle. So Summoners have some very nice stats. They have good MP. They've got phenomenal magic, the best out of all the Viera casters, and just one of the best in general. And while they're not fast, they're the slowest Viera class, they're still fine. Like, it's not terrible. Now, the big thing that you're keeping in mind with Summoners, though, is all of the spells. Unicorn, heal HP and status ailments, deal damage to zombies. Afreet, Rama, and Shiva to deal fire, lightning, and ice damage, respectively, in a big AoE, might I add. Kieran to gradually heal HP, put regen on everybody. Carbuncle to cast Reflect on everyone. Phoenix to revive allies and deal damage to zombies. And Medine to deal holy damage in general. Combine that with the fact that they get the half MP support ability, and you have a very strong caster, especially if you decide to give them double cast. Viera summoners with double cast are just like incredibly, infamously disgusting. They care about giving some HP back to your allies and then blowing up enemies with reckless abandon. And again, I think they have to go in S tier. Is there a lot of broken stuff in FFTA? Yeah, I would say that there is. But like, these classes are disgusting, dude. There's a reason that they got rebalanced in A2. Finally, we have Elementalist, and I think Elementalist is definitely going to fall down a couple of tiers just because you have to compare it to things like Summoner. It's going to go in B tier. It's not a bad job at all, like realistically, on any other race. It's a very solid option, especially because, again, it does get to benefit from double cast, but Elementalist cares more about having a range of elemental damage types while also being able to inflict some status effects. Kind of like if ninjas actually cared about their magic damage and were able to do good magic damage while also disabling things. That's where Elementalist is at. It's not a job that wants to be fighting in melee, really, but you do get every element at your disposal except for Holy. You get the ability to disable targets, heal allies, blind things, confuse things, immobilize things, slow things. And then if you feel like it, randomly change elemental resistance and targets, which is really not worth the effort. May as well just like hit them with something, and if you know that they have a weakness, something, great. But Elementalist is definitely nice. It doesn't have the raw oomph that some of the other Viera classes or some of the other classes in general have, but it's definitely not a bad option. I think it is a pretty strong choice, at the very least as a secondary spell option for something that's going to be using double cast. Now, finally, we're moving on to Moogles. And if you've been thinking, Tom, this is a very top-heavy list, I mean, it's going to stay that way, but this is where we're going to have a lot of our lower tier jobs, unfortunately. Moogles definitely got the short end of the stick by being the technical race. Not like they're technically a race, but by being a race that has a lot of versatility and weird options to it. And a lot of those weird options don't really work out all that great. So, animist, first off. Animist is an interesting option because it does have decent stats. Like, it's not bad HP, it's not bad defensively, they can actually be surprisingly tanky, and they're okay in terms of speed. But the main thing that they have going for them is a lot of weird, you would almost think Beastmaster-esque abilities, but not really, where they invoke the aura of different types of monsters to get different abilities. They can put stuff to sleep. They can get a big defense boost. They can heal things. They can charm targets. They can deal actually a decent amount of damage in a line with Chocobo Rush. Like, there's things that they can do, but they're very niche, and I found 9 times out of 10, you're going to find less use from Animist than the enemy is. I think overall, it's a D tier class. It has some possibilities. It is able to be alarmingly tanky at times, but you're not turning to Moogles for tanking when you have things like Defender and Paladin available, right? Like, yeah, you can put things to sleep, you can deal some damage, but you can do that with other jobs that have better stats and better ability utility, right? Now, what is nice is you get the ability to block arrows, so if you're fighting archers, you can just completely nullify that. But again, that's kind of a niche thing, right? You're relying on there being archers and then them targeting you. It's not the best thing around. So I think solidly D tier is where I'm going to go with Animus. Now, black mages, again, are fine. However, the issue with Moogle black mages is they don't have a similar level of utility to Hume black mages, to say nothing of Numu black mages. Their stats aren't as good. They don't have as many different abilities that they can learn from other jobs to synergize with black magic or other jobs that want you to put black magic on them. So I think they rest solidly in C tier. If you're pressed and you have no other option for some ranged elemental damage with magic, then, like, sure, a Moogle black mage is fine. Like, soldiers aren't bad, archers aren't bad, fencers aren't bad. It's in that same tier, but compared to what you're able to do with Hume and especially Numu with some of the other jobs that you have available to those races, it just can't really compete, which is a shame, but, I mean, you've got a job spread over 3 different races. There's gonna have to be one that's on the bottom, right? Now, Moogle Thieves, I think, are going to also be in D tier. The thing about Moogle Thieves is they're, like, really fast. If you're going to use a thief, you typically want a Moogle Thief over a Hume Thief for the most part. but they have all the same abilities, and they're not going to be something that you really want for combat most of the time. Maybe they'll be a little bit dodgier, maybe they'll get a few more extra actions. If you're desperately trying to steal something with them, then yeah, the Moogle will help with that, but it's not something that you want to be fielding as a regular mainstay of your army. They're not really much better than Hume thieves, certainly not enough to bump them up a tier. I think D is where we rest. Now, Gunner is where we get one of the two most interesting options for Moogles, and I do actually really like it. I think Gunner is an A-tier job. The thing about Gunner is it's the only job in the game that can use firearms, and that gives it a massive range advantage compared to anything else in the game. Now, Gunners have weird stats. So they've got pretty bad HP, terrible MP, and pretty terrible attack as well. But they have really good defense for some reason, and like pretty good magic defense, even though their role is as like a ranged damage dealer and kind of support unit. So you really aren't expecting them to ever be hit. But they've got really good defense. It's kind of weird. Now, the nice thing about Gunners is, again, they can use firearms, so they have absolutely massive range, and they're quite accurate as well. Combine that with the fact that they have some elemental damage options with Fire Shot, Bolt Shot, Ice Shot, and then the ability to inflict status effects like Confusion, Charm, Blind, Silence, and Stop, especially Stop Shot. You do have some very strong options there. If you want to bring a Moogle, being able to just spam Stop Shot on things to completely disrupt enemy formations and take key characters out of the fight can be extremely nasty, especially at the range that they're able to do it from. Their damage is also fine. It's not great, but it's fine. And they get Concentrate to increase their hit rate, which is actually really good, given the fact that like you're probably not moving them out of your spawn zone too much, which means a lot of the time they're going to be shooting at things that are facing head on to them. You're not going to be able to sneak around for back attacks a lot of the time. So your accuracy is going to be worse, but you can balance that out with Concentrate, which is really nice. They're not going to be the most damaging job in the game by any means, but the extreme range that they have does count for something, while still being decently damaging and having an array of different support options as well. So definitely not a bad job overall. Moogle Knight is unfortunately going to go into C tier. I really like Moogle Knight or Mog Knight as it's described. The issue is, while it's essentially the Moogle equivalent of fighter and gladiator, Moogles don't want to be in melee, and while a Moogle Knight can be tanky and can deal good damage, they're just not going to be on the same level as equivalent jobs from other races. And again, because of the weird kind of esoteric job choices that Moogles get, they're not going to be particularly great at overall class versatility either. Now, so what do Moogle Knights do? They do exactly what you would expect. They get rush, they get beat down, they get, I believe, a backdraft equivalent. They can wield sword and shield. They're like the only sword and board Moogle unit in the game. Like, they can boost their own defense. They have options. It's like a weird blend of fighter and soldier, but it's really not what you want. Like, the job doesn't have the best physical stats. It's got fine HP, fine attack, very good defense, admittedly, fine magic resist, completely average speed. It's basically just a soldier with a couple of extra abilities from things like fighter thrown in. So if you really want to have the option to have a Moogle that's going to be a frontline fighter with kind of equivalent abilities to things like Hume's, then, I mean, this is what you got, but it's never going to be the best role for a Moogle, unfortunately. It's a shame, but what can you do? Now, Time Mage, fortunately, I think this is where Moogles get a little bit of a boost. Moogle Time Mage is going to go in B tier right alongside Numu, because for all the same reasons that Numu Time Mages are a little bit lower tier compared to their other options, Moogle Time Mages are on exactly the same bar. Like, yeah, they've got slightly varied stats, but the abilities that they're going to use are the same. You've got your haste, your slow, your stop, your demi, different things like that put the job on a very equal playing field with other jobs of the same type from different races, right? Time Mage cares way less about your stats and way more about the functionality of what it is that you're trying to do with it. And then combine that with the fact that you can like have black magic on it to be able to deal good magic damage. Time Mage does still get good magic growth, even if it's not as good as Numu magic growth. I think it's certainly good. I think it's just as good to have a Moogle Time Mage as it is to have a Numu Time Mage. Now, Juggler is actually my favorite Moogle class, and I don't think it's phenomenal, but I do think it falls very solidly into A tier. Juggler has nice stats. Good HP, good attack, great defense, actually. The strongest defensive class from a raw physical defense standpoint for Moogles, which is weird over Mognite, but what can you do? Very bad magic, and then very bad magic resist, but very good speed overall. Juggler is nice because it actually feels like it has an array of abilities that are doing things that you want. Like being able to regularly disable enemies while dealing damage to them, great. Being able to quicken an ally, great. Being able to kind of have some thief-esque abilities going on, great. It's a nice job, and it definitely is where I often find my Moogles falling when I do decide to use them, which is not often. But it is a nice array of abilities. They get the same type of equipment as thieves do. They can throw items to deal damage. They can throw fire bombs to berserk things and deal fire damage. Like, they have weird options that definitely are cohesive and make sense from a sort of character design lore standpoint, while also just having some good damage and versatility. I really like jugglers. I think they're one of the better Moogle options. Finally, the last job on this list is the gadgeteer, and it goes directly into F alongside morpher. Gadgeteer is such a weird one because it's kind of like, what if we took calculator, but made it so that you have no control over what gets targeted, and also everything just randomly succeeds or fails? So gadgeteer, much like morpher, is a weird niche class. It's got decent enough stats, like it's got good HP, good attack, very nice defense, actually, good magic, great resistance, kind of slow. But what the job does is it uses gadgets. And gadgets do all sorts of nonsense. Maybe like red spring works like haste, but who will it hit? You or the enemy. Blue screw works like dispel, but who will it hit? You or the enemy. And that's what every single one of these abilities does. Inflicts poison, darkness, heals HP, inflicts doom, sleep, or works like barrier. But who will it hit? So you are choosing to bring a character out of the typically 5 that you are allowed to field. That is literally just flipping a coin and saying, am I giving a benefit to my team or the enemy? And unfortunately, there's really no reason that you would want to give these beneficial effects that you normally want on you to the enemy, and vice versa. Like, why would I want to haste the enemy? Why would I want to inflict poison on myself? There's no reason for it. Can it be strong? I mean, yeah. Casting haste on your whole party is great, but that's only going to happen 50% of the time, and 50% of the time you're just going to put yourself at a disadvantage. It's a tactician's worst nightmare. So gadgeteer sucks. Its stats are fine. Its gear is fine. It gets some decent reaction abilities like damage to MP and auto regen, but that's all you would potentially want it for. And then it's straight in the bin with that garbage. And unfortunately, ending on the gadgeteer note, that's the end of this tier list. I feel pretty confident about where things are at here. There's a lot of very strong jobs in FFTA. It's pretty famously unbalanced, but what's nice is that does mean that you have a lot of different options for what you can do with characters of different races. Realistically, anything from C tier or above is absolutely going to be useful, and that's why we really only have a few options in D through F, but it makes those options that aren't particularly great stand out all the more as things that are not particularly great. So let me know what your thoughts are on this tier list. Let me know where you would place each of these jobs, or if there's a particular placement that you think falls out of band with what the overall general expected experience would be with them. I just think there's a lot of really strong options in FFTA, and it makes for a lot of really fun character building. With that said, though, I'm going to start wrapping this one up here. My name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. I very much appreciate all of you for watching. I hope you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there. And remember, be good to each other, everybody. Bye now.